Alright guys, we are getting into compensation, chapter 11, specifically what we call total rewards. So most people use the word compensation. HR, we kind of combine a few things in there. So we will get to that as soon as I get this all figured out here. And I'll start going through it. One thing I want to point out, I won't make you watch a really old school video here, but Henry Ford, you know, right, Ford Motor Company, assembly line, etc. Highlighted this interesting theory that's been around for a while. It's called wage efficiency theory, and that says that if you pay more money for the job, which accountants love hearing that, of course, but if you pay more money for the job, it's actually better for the business in the long run because you are able to attract higher talent. So let's make this really simple. If there's a job that we benchmarked at $45,000 a year, and we hire someone and they can produce 30 widgets a year or sell or a quarter or whatever it is, sell 30 cell phones a month, that if I up that job from $45,000 a year to $65,000 a year, I can find someone who can produce twice that amount. So in a sense, I can find one person to sell 60 cell phones a month for $65,000 a year, or I can hire two people at $45,000 each to produce kind of the same amount. So the idea is, if you are able to find those people, of course that's an assumption in the process, if you're able to find those people, that if you pay more, in fact you get more. If you pay more and you have a good selection system, just paying a bonehead more is not going to help you, right? But if you pay more, you're able to attract and retain good talent, easier to manage, better business objectives, outcomes, etc. You can see it. So he kind of did an interesting test on that. He wasn't trying to test it, I don't think. He raised the salary at the time to $5 a day, and which was twice what they were making, workers were making anywhere else, and they were never had a problem finding people because of that. So you can imagine if an entry-level job in your field starts out at 60 grand a year, well, let's say from now on this company hires the exact same job at 120 grand a year. It's a very different model. So anyway, that's called a wage efficiency theory. But as we get into compensation, a few things to keep in mind. We're going to use the word total rewards. And that is, yes, what you pay people matters, and money matters. It matters psychologically. It matters in terms of, you know, their means to an end. But there's a lot more that we do that costs money, that costs time, that we can design our whole organizational system in order to attract and retain good talent, right people, and to do it in a legal manner. So when we use the word total rewards, we're talking about monetary and non-monetary rewards. So I get a paycheck from the university. I also get medical benefits from the university. So those are kind of intangible. But I also have, or an indirect reward, but I also have a really fun job that I love doing. So, and that was designed by somebody. Somebody came up with that job, I don't know, 1,000 years ago or something like that. But all of those together is what we say, this is the total thing that we offer to employees. This is what we call total rewards. So that's what we're going to kind of walk through here. 3 different categories, a few different definitions. They're going to be important to be able to distinguish them. Tangible direct rewards, that's money. Money or something that you get. Wages, of course, your hourly rate or your salary rate, bonuses, incentives, or, I mean, whatever it is, but it's something that you get, you can go do what you want with. That's direct. That's a direct reward and a tangible reward. There's also tangible rewards that are indirect, meaning they're not money. So that's benefits, paid time off, stuff like that. I can't take my medical benefits and go to Disneyland. It doesn't work that way, but it's still a reward, an indirect reward that I get. The last one, of course, is what you call intangible. That's a supportive work environment, fun work, fun job, stuff like that. So we try to design jobs, back to the job design chapter, we try to design jobs that maximize as much as we can within our budget, consistent with our business strategy, each of these things in order to attract and retain the right talent. So definitions, I think most people know these. I'm not going to sit here and read them. This is definitely a page that you're going to want to know, not just for exams and quizzes and papers, that too, but just in terms of vernacular. For how people use it when they say, what's your wage? Well, you know at that point that's an hourly worker. Or what's your salary? You know they're not paid wages. So you're going to be able to distinguish between the two. The next chapter, we're going to talk about variable pay. That is pay that varies, preferably on performance. So you perform well, you make a lot of money. You don't perform well, you don't get paid a lot of money, and eventually quit or get fired. So not a whole lot on variable pay in this section, but most of all just kind of the structure of compensation. One of the big laws, there's a lot of laws on compensation, as you can imagine, but one of them is called the Fair Labor Standards Act. It's passed in 1935, a couple years after like the Wagner Act, Social Security, right? So at the time, is trying to crawl out of a pretty nasty national depression. And the Fair Labor Standards Act set things like minimum wage, which was appalling to employers. Like, how dare you tell us what we can and can't pay people? You know, government, it's a government takeover of the business sector, and in some ways it had massive influence. Child labor provisions. So some states it's 14 and under, can't work. Some states you can work, start working when you're 16, and all the way up. And of course, we haven't got to it yet, but hazardous jobs can only be 18 and older. So it kind of sets some of those provisions. You've probably seen those old pictures of, 10-year-old kids. My kids' age are coal miners. Well, why? Because people go, oh, because they were small, they could fit in the little holes and pull up. Yeah, there is that, but it was really about money. I can pay a kid a lot less than I have to pay an adult, and they'll just keep working. So at a time of high unemployment, families are saying, yeah, we need to put food on the table. So forget school, you're going to work. So those child labor provisions put in this, as well as distinguishing between what is exempt and what is non-exempt pay. You've probably ever heard that. If you've had an exempt job, people go, yeah, I've had an exempt job. And I'll say, great, what were you exempt from? They're like, I have no idea. That's talking about exemption to the overtime clause in the Fair Labor Standards Act and a few other things, but that's kind of the main one that stands out. So if you are exempt, it means you don't qualify for overtime even if you work those hours. And if you're non-exempt, you do get overtime, which is usually time and a half, 1.5. Usually. There are some exceptions there too. So it sets the floor. Let's talk about minimum wage real quick. So at a Washington state level, we've got Initiative 1433 that passed in 2016, so quite a while ago, and it was a phased-in approach. You can see here 2017, 2018, 2019, and then after that, Elle and I will be making cost of living adjustments to the minimum wage. Right now, Washington State does have the highest minimum wage in the nation at a federal level. Minimum wage is $7.25, but kind of irrelevant. States do mostly their own thing. You can see a map here of what that looks like. There's some funny ones which we won't go into, like at Montana at $4 an hour and Georgia at $5.15, stuff like that. So that's a state minimum wage. That just means the state minimum wage is below the federal minimum wage. Company has to pay, of course, the higher of the two. You see Arizona's up to 12. California is at 13, right behind us. And so people are kind of creeping up. Washington is the top right now, but who knows? That'll shift from time to time. That was driven from the Initiative 1433, and projections say that both Washington and California will continue to increase that minimum wage, which, of course, as you can imagine, there is a ton of debate around that. But that is the minimum wage by the states, usually, not always, usually set above minimum wage by United States government, which came from this law, the Fair Labor Standards Act. A few other things on exemption. So how do you know if a job is exempt? So if you hire someone and they work 50 hours that week, do you pay them time and a half or whatever it is for those extra 10 hours, or do you pay them at all? Do you have to? That's driven by this law, and it has kind of some benchmarks that you would look at. So there are categories for exemption. If you're an executive, you're probably an exempt employee. You might work 40 hours a week. You might work 80 hours a week. You get paid for 40. You get paid for your salary. There's an administrative exemption. So to us, in this part of the history of the United States and vernacular, administrative usually means like secretarial stuff. That's not what this is. Like administrative assistant, that's not what this is. Administrative means manager. You are administrating. You're an agent of the company. So if you're a manager, you'll probably be exempt. A professional employee, think computer programmer, lawyer, doctor, engineer, stuff like that, they'll be exempt. You can see a computer employee. It was put back in the day, but we usually use that now in terms of coders, so we might use the word software engineers, and then outside sales. So those are kind of the main categories of exemption. If you have a job that fits one of those and fits that criteria that you can see on the right, it's probably an exempt job. What I can't do is hire a bricklayer and say, boy, I'm going to want that person to work more hours, so I'll make that job exempt. No, it's not how it works. The labor code, in this case the Fair Labor Standards Act, is what determines exemption or non-exemption, where you would have to pay overtime. People get caught in that a lot, actually. You would think the law's been around for 100 years. We should know. People get caught because what happens is they don't pay people overtime, and then 10 years later they realize it. And you can imagine that's a lot of back pay and a lot of overtime. So that's a very, very tricky law you want to stay on top of. A couple of the laws that we already know about, of course, there's the Equal Pay Act, 1963. That is mainly in regard to gender, paying people fairly between gender. There's a Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act, I believe 2007, the one Obama signed, that extended the statute of limitations. In some, made it easier for people to bring suits, lawsuits against companies for discrimination when it had been many years later, not just, hey, you have 180 days to sue the company. Well, I didn't know until a year later. Well, so this law now says the person can go back and do that. And then we covered a little bit about independent contractor regulations and 1099 employees and no benefits and stuff like that. So they're usually going to have a higher hourly rate working for your firm because they don't have the benefits, which we'll talk about a little bit later. In addition, regarding independent contractors, all kinds of codes on this. If you have questions, you can ask me. It's laid out in the book a little bit. But basically, an independent contractor, the key word there is independent, right? There's the beginning point. There's a starting point. They have control over their own work. They have control over their own finances. The nature of the relationship is contractual. It's not an employee relationship. Different set of laws, tax codes apply. People get burned on this often too. The most classic case is probably Microsoft, who is hiring employees and giving them stock options, and hiring independent contractors not giving them stock options because they weren't employees. But if someone walked into Microsoft, you couldn't tell a difference between who was an independent contractor and who was an employee. They were doing the same things under the supervision of the managers. And of course, the independent contractors sued for those quite valuable stock options. Other laws. This is just a concept I want you to be aware of. You've heard from time to time maybe this idea that if you can get a construction job with the state or building something for the highway department or something like that, then it'll be a higher paying job per hour. You may wonder why that is. It has to do with this concept called prevailing wage. And that is where government money is paying for it. If you're building a bridge for or something like that, where government money is paying for it, you're not going to pay the minimum wage. You're going to pay a prevailing wage. So a higher wage than what you can get away with. There's all kinds of reasons behind that, mainly out of economics, called the multiplier effect. And that is the government would like to stimulate the economy, paying more people. And every time there's a transaction, there's taxes.